A millionaire doctor noticed the new resident. What she did changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to the main character. The hospital never truly slept. Even at 2:30 in the morning, the fluorescent lights hummed softly above long white corridors, and the steady rhythm of heart monitors filled the air like a quiet metronome. Dr. Ethan Carter stood at the glass wall of the intensive care unit, his hands folded behind his back, eyes fixed on the patient inside. To most people in the city, Ethan Carter was a legend. A world-renowned surgeon, the youngest partner in a private medical group valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, a man whose name appeared on hospital wings, research grants, and medical journals. But inside these walls, Ethan was known for something else: control. He did not raise his voice, he did not hesitate, and he never let emotion interfere with decisions measured in heartbeats and blood loss. That was how he survived the night his wife died on an operating table 10 years ago. That was how he built a reputation that saved thousands of lives. And that was why he never looked twice at residents who came and went through his department every year. Until tonight. Ethan turned slightly as the automatic doors opened behind him. A young woman stepped into the unit, clutching a patient chart close to her chest. Her posture was straight, but there was a nervous tightness in her shoulders that told him she was new. Very new. The badge on her coat read, Dr. Claire Morgan, resident. He almost looked away. Almost. But then he noticed something. Before approaching the bed, she paused. She did not rush. She did not call for a nurse. She did not glance at the monitor first, like most residents were trained to do. Instead, she leaned closer to the patient and spoke quietly. "Good evening, Mr. Holloway. It is Dr. Morgan. I am here with you." Her voice was calm, not rehearsed, not clinical. Ethan frowned slightly. The patient was unresponsive, sedated. According to the chart, he had been in that state for days. Still, she spoke to him. She checked his hands, gently repositioning his fingers so they rested comfortably against the blanket. She adjusted the pillow by half an inch, then finally looked up at the monitor. Only then did she begin her examination. Ethan felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. He had seen competence. He had seen brilliance. He had seen arrogance and fear and ambition wrapped in white coats. But this was different. This was intentional. A nurse passed behind him and whispered, "New resident, first week in the unit." Ethan nodded without answering. Dr. Morgan finished her check, wrote a brief note in her chart by hand instead of typing, then stood quietly at the bedside for several seconds longer than necessary, as if waiting for something. Then she turned to leave. Their eyes met for the first time. She stiffened. He saw it immediately. The recognition, the sudden awareness that she had been observed by someone who carried authority in every step he took. She straightened her coat. "Dr. Carter," she said, "I did not realize you were on this floor tonight." "I usually am," he replied. His voice was even, controlled. "You speak to your patients." She blinked, unsure if that was criticism. "Yes, sir," she said carefully. "I do." "Why?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I would want someone to speak to me." Ethan held her gaze for a moment longer than he intended. Then he nodded once. "Carry on." As she walked away, Ethan remained where he was, staring through the glass at the patient who had not responded to treatment in weeks. For the first time in a very long while, he found himself wondering if he had missed something that could not be measured by machines. And he could not stop thinking about the new resident who had just reminded him why he became a doctor in the first place. The night continued. But Dr. Ethan Carter did not move. After Dr. Claire Morgan disappeared down the corridor, the glass wall of the intensive care unit reflected his own image back at him. Calm posture, neutral expression, the same man he had been for years. And yet, something had shifted. Ethan turned away and walked toward his office, his footsteps measured, familiar. He had learned long ago that routine was protection. Routine kept emotion from bleeding into judgment. Inside his office, the lights came on automatically. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, thousands of tiny white headlights crawling through the darkness like veins of light, a view most people dreamed of. Ethan rarely noticed it anymore. He loosened his tie, placed his coat on the chair, and sat behind the desk that bore his name in brushed steel. On the surface lay patient files stacked with perfect alignment, each one a reminder of lives balanced on decisions he made in seconds. He opened the file of the man in the intensive care unit, Mr. Holloway, age 68, multi-organ failure, poor prognosis. The words were clean, clinical, final. Ethan stared at them longer than necessary. 10 years ago, he had believed compassion made better doctors. 5 years ago, he learned compassion could destroy them. The memory came uninvited, as it always did. The operating room, the alarm, the moment he realized saving one life meant losing another. His wife had been a patient that night, a complication no one could have predicted, a decision he would relive forever. After that, Ethan learned control, distance, precision, care without attachment. That philosophy built his career. It built the medical empire he now led. It saved countless lives. And yet, earlier that night, a resident had quietly undone it with a single sentence. "Because I would want someone to speak to me." Ethan closed the file. Across the hospital, Dr. Claire Morgan stood alone in the residence lounge, washing her hands for longer than required. The water was warm, steady, grounding. Her heart was still racing. She had not expected Dr. Carter to be there. No one ever did. He appeared without warning, like gravity itself, silent, unavoidable. She dried her hands slowly, replaying the moment in her mind. The question, the pause, the way he had looked at her, not with anger or dismissal, but with something else, curiosity. Claire had learned to recognize that look early in her training. It was the look that decided whether someone would be given a chance or quietly pushed aside. She exhaled and straightened her coat. Claire Morgan did not come from legacy hospitals or family connections. She grew up in a small apartment with a mother who worked double shifts and a father who taught her one thing above all else: never treat people like problems to be solved. That belief followed her into medical school, into residency, into every patient room she entered. It also made her different enough to be noticed. Back in his office, Ethan pulled up her profile on his tablet before he could stop himself. Top percentile scores, no disciplinary issues, volunteer work listed in margins most residents did not bother filling in. He frowned slightly. Competence, yes. But there was something else. Ethan locked the screen and leaned back in his chair. He told himself it was nothing, just another resident, another brief interruption in a system that ran perfectly without sentiment. Still, as the night deepened, his thoughts returned to the intensive care unit, to the patient everyone had already given up on, to the resident who had stayed behind after everyone else had left. And for the first time in years, Dr. Ethan Carter felt the uncomfortable stirrings of a question he had buried long ago. What if healing was not finished once the medicine stopped working? And what if the new resident had just reminded him of that truth? Morning arrived quietly at the hospital, slipping in through narrow windows and softening the harsh glow of overnight fluorescent lights. Dr. Claire Morgan adjusted her stethoscope as she stepped back into the intensive care unit for morning rounds. She had slept less than 4 hours, but her movements were steady, deliberate. Fatigue was familiar. It never surprised her anymore. Mr. Holloway was her first stop. The night nurse gave a brief update. No major changes. Vitals stable. No response to stimuli. The same words Claire had heard every day since she was assigned to him. Still, she approached the bed as if something might be different. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," she said gently. "It is Claire again. The sun is up. You made it through another night." She checked his pulse, then adjusted the blanket that had slipped slightly from his shoulder. Her movements were careful, almost reverent, as though he could feel every touch. She spoke as she worked, narrating what she was doing, the way her father once narrated everything while fixing old radios at their kitchen table. He had said, "Silence made people disappear faster." Across the unit, Dr. Ethan Carter observed without interrupting. He had joined rounds unannounced, standing at the edge of the group as residents presented cases with clipped efficiency. When they reached Mr. Holloway, the tone shifted. "Prognosis remains poor," one resident said. "Family has been informed. No new interventions planned." Ethan nodded. That was the correct answer. Then Claire spoke. "Vitals remain stable," she said, keeping her voice calm. "But there is increased muscle response in the left hand. It is subtle, but it is new." The room stilled. Ethan lifted his gaze toward her. "Increased response does not change outcome," another resident added quickly. Claire did not argue. She simply nodded. "No, sir, but it changes how long I stay with him." That caught Ethan's attention. Rounds moved on, but the words lingered. Later that afternoon, Claire returned alone. She had finished her assigned duties, yet she remained. She pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat. She read from the chart quietly. Not lab values, not diagnoses. She read notes from years earlier, old physician observations, mentions of a garden Mr. Holloway once kept, tomatoes, basil, the smell of soil after rain. "You loved growing things," she said softly. "That tells me you know how to wait." She took his hand, not gripping it, just resting her fingers against his palm. The monitor beeped steadily. In his office, Ethan Carter stared at a security feed he rarely checked. The intensive care unit camera showed Claire seated beside the bed, unmoving, as if time itself had slowed around her. He told himself he was monitoring compliance, but he did not look away. Hours passed. At one point, Claire leaned closer. "You do not have to wake up," she whispered. "But if you are tired of being alone, I am here." Her words were simple, unpolished, human. The monitor flickered, a fractional change, almost invisible. Claire froze. She watched the screen. Then his hand. His fingers twitched. Not reflex, not spasm. Purpose. Claire's breath caught. She pressed the call button calmly, refusing to let excitement turn into panic. When the medical team arrived, Ethan was already there. He stared at the monitor, then at the patient, then at the resident who stood quietly at the bedside, hands folded, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. "Document everything," Ethan said evenly. Claire nodded. "Already did." As the room cleared, Ethan remained behind. "You stayed longer than required," he said. "Yes, sir." "Why?" Claire met his eyes. This time she did not hesitate. "Because sometimes the body needs medicine," she said. "And sometimes people just need someone to stay." Ethan said nothing. But inside, something old and tightly sealed cracked open. For the first time since the night he lost his wife, Dr. Ethan Carter wondered if healing had rules he had never written down. The change did not make headlines. It did not trigger alarms or applause. But inside the intensive care unit, it changed everything. By the next morning, the chart told a different story. Still critical, still fragile, but no longer static. Dr. Ethan Carter reviewed the update in silence as the medical team gathered around him. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee, the scent of long shifts and quiet urgency. "Increased responsiveness noted overnight," a fellow attending said. "Minimal, but consistent." Ethan nodded once. His eyes moved, not to the chart, but to Dr. Claire Morgan standing slightly behind the group. She looked the same as she always did, calm, focused, unassuming. Yet the way other residents glanced at her had changed. Not admiration, not envy, attention. After rounds ended, Ethan motioned for Claire to follow him. They walked side by side down a quiet corridor, their footsteps echoing against polished floors. Nurses passed them without comment. No one interrupted. Everyone recognized that posture, that direction. Ethan stopped outside a small consultation room and gestured for her to enter. "You documented increased motor response," he said once the door closed. "Yes, sir." "And you stayed beyond your assigned hours?" "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment. "You understand that personal involvement can compromise objectivity?" Claire nodded. "I do." "Then why continue?" She did not rush her answer. "Because objectivity is not the same as absence," she said. "I followed protocol. I did not administer unauthorized treatment. I simply stayed." Ethan leaned back against the table, arms crossed. "Do you believe that staying made a difference?" "I believe it mattered," she replied, "even if it did not change the outcome." The answer unsettled him more than any argument would have. "Most residents would argue statistics," Ethan said. "I am not most residents," Claire replied quietly. There was no arrogance in her voice, only certainty. Ethan dismissed her with a nod, but as she left the room, he remained standing, staring at the empty chair she had occupied. That evening, he returned to the intensive care unit alone. Mr. Holloway lay as before, machines breathing for him, lines tracing fragile paths into his body. But something was different. The room no longer felt abandoned. Ethan stood at the bedside, hands resting lightly on the rail. For the first time, he did not speak in percentages or probabilities. "Your resident thinks you are still here," he said quietly, almost to himself. "She thinks you can hear us." The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Ethan exhaled slowly. Across the unit, Claire finished her notes and prepared to leave when she noticed him standing there. She hesitated, then approached. "I was heading out," she said. "But I can stay if you need updates." Ethan shook his head. "No, I wanted to observe." She nodded, understanding more than he expected. They stood in silence for a moment, two doctors from different worlds sharing the same quiet space. "You remind me of someone," Ethan said finally. Claire did not ask who. Instead, she said, "Then maybe they mattered too." That night, Ethan reviewed patient protocols he had not questioned in years. Efficiency, throughput, measurable outcomes. None of them mentioned presence. None of them mentioned staying. "By the end of the week, Mr. Holloway responded again. A longer movement, a clearer signal, still not recovery but undeniable progress. Whispers began. Some credited luck. Others cited delayed neurological response. Ethan said nothing. He only watched as Claire continued her quiet routine, unchanged by the attention, unaffected by the shift around her. And slowly, against his own instincts, Dr. Ethan Carter began to allow a thought he once believed dangerous. What if healing was not something you commanded? What if it was something you honored? And what if the new resident was teaching him that lesson, one silent hour at a time? The fifth day began like the others, but everyone in the intensive care unit could feel the tension beneath the routine. Mr. Holloway was no longer invisible. His chart was requested more often. Nurses lingered longer at his bedside. Residents spoke in lower voices when discussing his case, as if the man beneath the machines might actually hear them. Because now, there was no denying it. He was responding. Dr. Ethan Carter stood at the foot of the bed as the morning assessment concluded. The numbers were still fragile, the risks still real, but the change was measurable. Intentional movement, increased awareness, signs that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. "This should not be happening," one attending murmured quietly. Ethan did not answer. Across the room, Dr. Claire Morgan finished documenting her notes. Her handwriting was steady, as it always was. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply stayed. When the team dispersed, Ethan remained behind and motioned for Claire to follow him into the hallway. "You need to be careful," he said once they were alone. Claire looked up at him, surprised. "About what, sir?" "About becoming the story," Ethan replied. "Hospitals do not like anomalies. Neither do committees." She nodded slowly. "I am not trying to be one. Intent does not always matter," he said. "Then neither does fear," she answered quietly. The words hung between them. Ethan searched her face, expecting defiance. What he found instead was resolve, not ambition, not rebellion, just clarity. That afternoon, Mr. Holloway opened his eyes. It was not dramatic, no gasps, no sudden awakening, just a slow, heavy blink. Claire was the only one in the room. She leaned forward instinctively. "Mr. Holloway," she said gently, "you are in the hospital. You are safe." His eyes shifted, unfocused, confused, but open. She pressed the call button and waited, her hand resting lightly on the bed rail. By the time the medical team arrived, Ethan was already there. He watched as Claire guided the patient through simple responses. One finger squeeze, a faint nod, a breath that no machine initiated. The room felt suspended in time. "This does not fit the timeline," someone whispered. Ethan stepped forward. "It fits the patient," he said. The words surprised even him. Later that evening, Ethan stood alone on the rooftop terrace outside his office. The city stretched endlessly below, bright and indifferent. For years, he had believed control was the highest form of care, but control had not saved his wife. Control had not saved him. Presence had saved this man. Claire joined him quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. She offered one without speaking. He took it. "You changed the course of this case," Ethan said. "I did not," she replied. "He did. You gave him something we stopped giving," he said. She looked at him. "Time?" He shook his head. "Permission, to still matter." The realization settled heavily between them. Downstairs, machines continued their steady rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, Dr. Ethan Carter did not feel like medicine was something he commanded. It was something he shared. And standing beside the resident who had quietly challenged everything he believed, he understood that what she did had not just changed a patient, it had changed him. Recovery did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, inches instead of miles. Mr. Holloway began responding to voices more consistently, His eyes followed movement. His breathing, once entirely dependent on machines, now showed moments of effort on its own. The intensive care unit adjusted around him. Physical therapy was introduced carefully. Short sessions, gentle prompts, progress measured in seconds of awareness and millimeters of strength. Dr. Claire Morgan was there for every session she was allowed to attend. She did not rush him. She did not push. "Take your time," she said softly each morning. "We are not going anywhere." Dr. Ethan Carter watched these sessions from the doorway more than once. He told himself it was oversight. He told himself it was responsibility. But the truth was simpler. He trusted her, and that realization unsettled him more than any medical uncertainty ever had. One afternoon, as Mr. Holloway rested after therapy, Ethan and Claire stood side by side near the window. "You should rotate off this case," Ethan said calmly. "You have other patients, other responsibilities." Claire nodded. "I know." "You are becoming emotionally invested," he added. She did not deny it. "Yes." The honesty surprised him. "That is dangerous," he said. She looked at him, not defensively, not challengingly, but openly. "Only if it replaces judgment. It has not." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "When did you decide to practice medicine this way?" he asked. Claire thought before answering. "When my father was sick. Everyone treated him like a diagnosis. One nurse treated him like a person. He died anyway. But he was not alone." Ethan felt the words land somewhere he had sealed shut for years. That evening, Mr. Holloway recognized Claire's voice clearly for the first time. When she spoke his name, his eyes focused. When she asked if he was in pain, his head moved slowly from side to side. When she said, "You are doing well," his fingers tightened faintly around hers. Ethan witnessed it all, not as a physician, as a man who had forgotten what presence looked like. Later that night, he found Claire in the stairwell, sitting on the steps, shoulders slumped for the first time since he had met her. "You stayed too long today," he said gently. She smiled faintly. He was tired. I wanted him to hear something kind before he slept. Ethan sat beside her without thinking. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, not urgent. "You know," he said after a moment, "when I was a resident, I believed excellence meant distance." "And now?" she asked. "And now I am not so sure," he admitted. She did not respond right away. "I do not think medicine needs less discipline," she said finally. "I think it needs more courage." Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to sit with uncertainty instead of fighting it. Above them, the hospital continued its endless rhythm. Below them, a man once written off as lost continued to heal. And between a doctor who had built his life on control and a resident who believed in staying, something quietly, irrevocably changed. Not just in a patient, but in the way healing itself was understood. The shift in the hospital was subtle at first, almost polite. Then it became impossible to ignore. Whispers followed Dr. Claire Morgan down the corridors. Meetings were held without her. Her name appeared more frequently in emails that did not include her. Mr. Holloway continued to improve, but instead of celebration, the progress triggered something else: scrutiny. One morning, Claire was called into the conference room just off the main ward. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that felt heavier than it should have. Two senior attendings sat at the table. A hospital administrator joined them, tablet already open. "We have concerns," the administrator began, "regarding your conduct in the intensive care unit." Claire kept her posture straight. "I am happy to address them." "You exceeded your assigned hours," one attending said, repeatedly. "I completed my duties," Claire replied, "and stayed within protocol." "You formed an attachment," the other said. "That compromises objectivity." Claire inhaled slowly. "I maintained clinical judgment at all times." The administrator tapped the screen. "Your presence is being cited as a factor in an unexpected recovery. That creates liability." Liability. The word landed hard. "Are you suggesting my actions harmed the patient?" Claire asked. "No," the administrator said. "We are suggesting they set a precedent." The meeting ended with a warning. Not formal, not yet, but clear. Outside the room, Ethan Carter was waiting. He did not speak immediately. He studied her face, noting the tightness around her eyes, the restraint in her expression. "They are uncomfortable," he said finally. "With what?" Claire asked. "With things they cannot quantify," Ethan replied. "And with you." She nodded once. "Then it has begun." "What has?" he asked. "The part where staying costs something," she said quietly. That afternoon, Ethan was summoned to the executive floor. The boardroom was cold, glass walls reflecting the city beyond. Administrators and department heads sat in careful alignment. "Dr. Carter," the hospital director began, "your resident is attracting attention." Ethan remained silent. "There are concerns about blurred boundaries," another added. "We cannot allow individual philosophy to override institutional standards." Ethan folded his hands on the table. "She followed protocol," he said. "She documented everything. There was no misconduct." "But you allowed it," the director replied. "Your presence lent approval." Ethan felt the familiar pull toward silence, toward distance, the instinct that had protected him for years. Then he thought of the night his wife died, of how no one stayed after the decision was made. "No," Ethan said evenly. "I witnessed it." The room stilled. "There is a difference," he continued, "between emotional negligence and professional presence. Dr. Morgan crossed neither." A pause. "We are considering rotating her out of the program," the administrator said, "temporarily." The word struck harder than any accusation. Ethan understood what they were really saying. Choose the system, or choose her. That evening, Claire stood at Mr. Holloway's bedside, unaware of what was unfolding. She spoke softly as she always did, describing the day, the weather, the progress he was making. When Ethan entered the room, she turned and immediately sensed something was wrong. "They are questioning you," he said. She nodded. "I know." "They may remove you from this case," he added. She swallowed. "Then you will stay." It was not a request. It was trust. Ethan looked at the patient, then at the resident who had reminded him what medicine once meant. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of a decision that could not be deferred. If he protected her, he would challenge the very structure he helped build. If he remained silent, he would lose something he could not name. And standing there, surrounded by machines and quiet hope, Dr. Ethan Carter realized the crisis was no longer about protocol. It was about who he chose to be. The decision did not wait for morning. Dr. Ethan Carter stood at the head of the boardroom table as the executive meeting reconvened, the city still dark beyond the glass walls. This time, he did not take the seat offered to him. He remained standing. "You are concerned about precedent," he said calmly. "So am I." The administrators exchanged glances. "For years," Ethan continued, "we have measured success by efficiency, by reduced length of stay, by outcomes we can graph. Those metrics matter, but they are not complete." One of the directors leaned forward. "Dr. Carter, this is not a philosophical discussion." "No," Ethan replied. "It is a leadership one." He tapped the tablet in front of him, bringing up Mr. Holloway's chart. Timelines, notes, documented observations. Every step Claire had taken was there, precise and compliant. "Dr. Morgan did not break protocol," Ethan said. "She followed it with intention. She did not override care. She enhanced it." Silence settled over the room. "You are asking us to excuse behavior that cannot be standardized," the administrator said. "I am asking you to recognize behavior that should be," Ethan answered. He took a breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to reveal. "This hospital exists because of a donation I made 10 years ago," he said evenly. "At the time, I believed resources alone could improve care. I was wrong." Several heads lifted. "I have since funded research, equipment, and expansion," he continued. "But what Dr. Morgan demonstrated is something no budget can buy. Presence, courage, humanity." The director frowned. "Are you threatening to withdraw support?" Ethan shook his head. "I am offering direction." He placed his hand flat on the table. "We will not rotate Dr. Morgan out," he said. "Instead, we will pilot a revised care model in the intensive care unit, one that formally integrates patient presence and continuity of caregiver involvement." The room was still. "You cannot mandate compassion," someone said quietly. "No," Ethan replied, "but you can protect it." By the time the meeting ended, the decision was recorded, not unanimously, but decisively. Downstairs, Claire stood frozen as Ethan found her outside the unit. "They will not remove you," he said. Her shoulders sagged slightly, relief flickering across her face before she could hide it. "Thank you." "This was not a favor," Ethan replied. "It was overdue." Together, they walked into the intensive care unit. Mr. Holloway was awake now, weak, confused, but unmistakably present. When Claire spoke his name, his eyes found her. "She stayed," he murmured hoarsely, his voice barely more than air. "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "She did." Claire squeezed the patient's hand, emotion finally breaking through her composure. In that moment, the hospital did not feel like an institution. It felt like what it was meant to be, a place where people mattered. As Ethan watched Claire return to her quiet routine, unchanged by victory or recognition, he understood the truth of what had happened. She had not surprised him by defying expectations. She had surprised him by reminding him who he was before he learned to stop staying. And that realization changed everything. Mr. Holloway was transferred out of the intensive care unit 3 weeks later. The announcement did not come with applause. There was no celebration in the halls, just a quiet update posted on the board, and a gentle shift in the rhythm of the floor. But those who had watched his journey understood what it meant. On the morning of the transfer, Dr. Claire Morgan stood at his bedside one last time, in the unit that had become strangely sacred to her. "You are going upstairs today," she said softly. "It will be louder, less machines, more light." Mr. Holloway blinked slowly, his gaze steady now, no longer lost. "You stayed," he whispered again, the words clearer than before. Claire smiled. "You did too." Across the room, Dr. Ethan Carter observed in silence. He did not interrupt. He did not hurry the moment. He had learned that some things needed space. Later that day, Ethan walked through the hospital without escort, without urgency. He passed nurses who now paused to greet him, residents who watched him with new curiosity, not fear. In the weeks that followed, the changes he initiated quietly took hold. Care teams were encouraged to maintain continuity. Time was protected, not cut, when presence mattered. No policy used the word compassion, but it lived in the margins, in permission to stay. Claire continued her residency without special treatment. She still worked long hours, still carried her own charts, still spoke to patients others assumed could not hear. But now, no one questioned it. One evening, Ethan found her in the courtyard outside the hospital, seated on a bench beneath a tree just beginning to bloom. "You never asked what happened in that boardroom," he said. She looked up at him. "I did not need to." He sat beside her, hands folded loosely in his lap. "I spent years believing leadership meant distance," he said. "I was wrong." Claire said nothing, letting the words settle. "You reminded me of something I lost," he continued. "Not my wife, my reason." She turned to him then. "You did not lose it," she said. "You protected it, until you were ready to let it back." Ethan breathed out slowly. In the months that followed, Mr. Holloway walked the halls with assistants. He laughed with physical therapists. He asked for sunlight. And every time he saw Claire, his face softened with recognition. The hospital changed, not because of a miracle, but because someone chose to stay. On a quiet evening, Ethan stood once more at the glass wall of the intensive care unit, watching the lights reflect back at him. For the first time in a decade, he did not feel like medicine was something he controlled. It was something he shared. And beside him, the resident who had once surprised him simply stood, steady and unassuming, continuing the work she had always done. Healing did not end with a cure. Sometimes, it ended with a choice: to stay.